Welcome to Pondering Passages. I'm Curt Austin. My good friend David Mullins is going to join us shortly, and we're going to ponder Psalm 126. Beautiful passage. Really is part of the Song of Ascents. Those who are going to Jerusalem for the celebrations, they're able to sing this song, they're able to relive that moment, and it really does say a lot about our own lives and what it is God wants us to do as we plant seeds and we harvest. Come back and we'll talk about it. We'll see you then. Welcome to Pondering Passages. We're doing with Psalm 126 today. We're pondering Psalm 126. And so this has been, just in full disclosure, it's been a couple of weeks since we've been able to get together. Dave decided he needed a vacation. And so he's been
And
out.
last week you decided you needed to work.
Yeah, so it's kind of put us off a little bit. So we actually, I've not been reading it every day, but I've been reading it every other day or so. Psalm 126 for the last couple of weeks, to be honest.
I know. We should be loaded for bear, which I'm not sure what that
st-
means, but
started on the 24th of July, and here we are in August. And so a couple of weeks of getting this in, and what do you think about this psalm, Dave? What
I've
did it go in your
I've
head?
I've thought about this psalm a lot. I mean, a lot. Especially one part of the psalm. So what about you?
I kind of liked it. It was one that grew on me. And you and I have had conversations not about this psalm, but just about life, and kind of what's been thrown at us over the last few weeks. Despite the fact that you were just enjoying the cushy life of vacation, and I was in work mode, but I thought it was just really interesting. I just thought it was really interesting how it seemed to resonate with me of the latter part of this, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
And and this first part, this is a psalm that I will think about from time to time, even before we jumped into it, because
okay.
it talks about when the Lord brought his exiles back to Jerusalem. And, there was a time they came back, and this comes to my mind every so often, that God brought them back. And I wonder what must have that been like to be in exile for so long, to know their history and their story. And then God brings them back. And the psalmist tells me what it was like. It was like a dream.
Like a dream. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like maybe we should say like a good dream.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be one of those things like, I never thought this day would come.
Yeah.
And here it is. And I just, in my mind, I had, I'm sure not everybody showed up on Thursday, right? I mean, it was trickling in as people were coming from these far-flung regions. But I love that idea that you're seeing families. It's been so long, they wouldn't recognize any individual person.
Yeah.
But
they always had this connection, though.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as Israel and the Jews, they were much. I mean, in America, we're very individualistic,
right?
So it is more about us and maybe our family and the people that we know. But for them, it was truly a community.
Yes.
And
so you would say, well, I know about your uncle Steve, or your aunt Phyllis, who was so faithful, and you would have these stories that you would share together.
Well, I think for Israel, it was even more than that. You didn't actually have to know the person. Just the fact that they were part of Israel was all that was needed. And you see this sometimes where, there was, I think it was on Netflix, and it was about the Patel family, who's from India. And when they were talking, And the guy that did the documentary is an actor that many people have seen on different things, but he was talking about doing a film on his family about how they were trying to set him up
Mm.
for marriage. And he talked about being a kid traveling in the United States, and they would go to a hotel, and when they would sign in, the person, the manager or owner would say, "Oh, you're a Patel." And they would invite them in to dinner because they were a Patel too. They would invite them for dinner. They would have them stay in their place. It sounded to me like it was family, even though they had no idea who these people were.
Right.
And it's that kind of connection, I think, at least for me in the United States, that I cannot comprehend. He thought it was odd, but if you're like first generation from that part of India, from the Patel part,
Mm.
uh, it it made complete sense. And he said, even though we had no idea who these people were, that treated us like we were like cousins,
Right.
relatives.
Right.
And
Mm.
so I think, like you were saying, when they were coming together, it was like a family reunion with,
Yeah.
even if you didn't know the folks.
Yeah. And I like the fact that they're not just living in this is yes, we were filled with laughter. We sang for joy, but that anybody that was around could see
Yeah,
this is a special thing. This is a big deal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Other nations. Oh my goodness, that, and maybe, and I didn't think about this. The 3 weeks we've been reading it, didn't think about this, but the other nations were familiar with their story as well.
Yes.
The other nations, whether they are watching on purpose or purposefully or not, they still noticed. And so the question is, what would other nations say about us?
That's a great point of if we feel alienated, if we feel isolated, and when there comes a point where God brings us in relationship back into relationship, and or we are just able to celebrate, let's say something else entirely, and we're able to really enjoy the favor of God in a moment. People around us are watching.
Yeah.
People watch how we go through life, and what that looks like then when we come on the other side of that.
Yeah. And so, we could perhaps contextualize this by saying, what would other neighbors say about us and our relationship to God and how God
Yep.
deals with us? And it might
Yep.
be, well, I don't think my neighbors even know. Uh, and so, that's a question, that maybe this passage asks us to ponder.
Yeah.
What is it that keeps us from allowing our neighbors to see a little bit deeper
Yeah.
into our relationship with God?
Yeah. And then I like in verse 3 that the writer then
He
uh,
agrees.
he agrees. I mean, it's just like, yep, that's exactly right. God
Yep,
has
you're
done
right,
it.
other nations.
And
The Lord
but
has does amazing things for us.
yeah, and not yeah. What joy! What
Yeah,
joy!
yeah, what joy. Uh, I want to point this out because I did not notice this. This phrase, "restore our fortunes." If I said this was actually somewhere else in the Psalm, would have you realized that it was? Because I
No,
did not. Okay. So it was actually the first verse, and I think that's why the A is there, because what it is when the Lord restored our fortunes. So I don't know if
what?
you still
I
what?
don't understand what I don't understand what you're saying.
Do you see the first verse up there?
Yeah,
And you see that A at the end
yeah,
in the brackets? It
uh-huh.
usually means there's an alternative translation.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think if you looked at the NLT and looked at that, it might say something along the lines of when the Lord restored our fortunes. And
I
and
just
why
happen to have the NLT right
yeah,
here.
yeah, take a look at that. I do. It's under some books though. So,
Um,
And the reason why translators will do this is because when the Lord restored our fortunes is kind of a hard phrase to translate in a way that makes sense to us. So what did you find out, Curt?
No, Jerusalem could also be Zion.
Oh,
That's
okay.
that's what the A means.
Okay. Okay. Well, and I don't know because I didn't see that. But an alternative translation is when the Lord restored our fortunes. And what the translator has done is try to help us in understanding what restoring our fortunes meant to
Ah,
these folks.
okay. Now you're not just making this up. You feel pretty confident that's true.
Yeah. 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 I feel pretty
Okay.
confident that's true. Yeah. Because that's what translators do. They try to translate in a way that especially like the New Living
Oh,
Translation, which is a dynamic translation, which
right.
tries to help us to get the same sense
Mhm.
as what
Mhm.
the original readers would have received.
Yeah. Yep.
And the original readers knew what it meant to restore the fortunes, because restoring their fortunes wasn't really about money. It was really about
Yeah.
relationship with God.
Well, and I felt like the second part of that, as streams renew the desert.
Yeah.
It's not about money. It's
Right.
not about wealth. It's not about
Right.
position. This renewal that just and I've never lived in the desert. I don't know how this works, but I've seen enough documentaries to know that when the rains fall, when the streams fill with water, the dry beds fill with water, life just becomes abundant,
Yeah.
right? The flowers bloom, the insects come out for even a very short amount of time. It even though it might only be a short amount of time, it's magical. The
Yeah.
transformation from one to the other.
Yeah. And after that, and I had a little bit of disconnect because it seemed like a jarring contrast to
It
all
did.
of a sudden talk about who planting, uh, because they're having the harvest right now, and
Yeah.
it's almost like he's, the maybe the phrase "the desert" causes the psalmist to think back to
Hmm.
when they were in the desert.
Hmm.
And then these two verses that have really stuck with me over the past, few weeks.
Why is that? What is it about those?
Well, because a lot of times we spend a lot of our time, listen, a lot of times we spend a lot of our time, uh,
That
we
is
spend a
true.
lot of our time planting, trying to get things going, trying to get things started, trying to build relationships.
Hmm.
And it's hard, and sometimes it's so hard that we do not continue through it. We give up, we
Hmm.
stop. We give up on our dreams, we give up on the plan, we give up on whatever it is. But what this Psalms reminded me is that we always plant in tears. Planting is difficult work. Planting is not easy. You don't even know if the plant will ever come to
I know.
maturity. But what he's telling me is that planting in tears, to not think about the planting, think about the harvest. And that was part of,
Hmm.
I think, their faith, thinking
Yeah.
about when the fortunes are restored because God is faithful.
So let's as you and I have been trying to practice, let's get out of our head and put it into our heart. So this spoke to you then specifically then.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, we're in the midst of COVID and everything, and if you're trying to start anything during COVID, you're planting in tears,
Hmm.
because the things that might have worked maybe even 2 years ago may not work now. But what the psalmist is telling me is to look forward and know that God is faithful. I mean, they planted as exiles for decades, a
Hmm.
century or two, but now they're harvesting. And so basically, it's like this is our story. We planted in tears, but man, the harvest. And perhaps the more tears you plant in, the greater the joy of the harvest.
Yeah.
They
I
weep as they go to plant their seed, but they sing as they return with a harvest. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
I really liked 5 and 6. That's really what stood out to me the entire couple of weeks that we've been looking at this. And one of the things that I don't know if I got stuck there, but it's where I landed, is the amount of time it takes between those planting
Hmm.
and the harvest. I mean, even if you take like winter wheat, I grew up in a farming area, and you'd plant winter wheat in around September, early September, all the way through early October, depending on what the fields are like, and you put that in, and it overwinters. It goes through really hard times, the weed itself, and it somehow becomes more dormant, and it just stays there, and you just have to wait. And in Indiana, at least, you harvest winter wheat around July 4th every
Mm.
year. You'll notice once you realize that's the time frame, then you'll notice that suddenly the wheat fields become just straw. Right? They get harvested around July 4th. That's 9 months
Yeah.
for a crop to
Yeah.
sit in the field, and you just are dependent on the weather. You're dependent on the fact that there won't be some sort of animals, and there's a thing called lodging where wheat will fall over if there's a strong wind or something. So you want wheat that can withstand the winds, the rains, the storms in the spring. And it has to survive that whole time. And so as it matures, you can lose a lot of wheat if it gets lodged, if it falls over, because then it gets wet and it stays wet, doesn't dry out. um, and so I that kept running it over and over in my head this entire time as I was reading this, is that you're planting, and I almost wondered if it wasn't even the act of planting itself, but just the waiting
Oh,
can be painful.
yeah.
That delay in that. So when you actually do bring in the harvest, it's a big deal
Yeah.
because the odds are against you. I had a friend who he sold crop insurance, and every farmer had crop insurance because the odds were you could lose your crop because of flooding or storms or whatever. And so you really needed to have that protection. And so for these folks, there was no such thing as crop insurance back, in this time. For them to be able to harvest, you would have this joy that
Oh,
that
yeah.
in fact it survived, it worked. Everything we'd hoped has come to pass, and it really directly relates back to their coming back into Jerusalem. That we never, you dreamed, you hoped, you really,
Yeah.
and it did. It came to pass,
Yeah.
and nothing could be more
Finally,
joyful than that. Yeah, I love
finally,
that.
finally,
But
it came in. So, and this Psalms go. I mean, we looked at it for 3 weeks, but it's really going to stick with me, I think, for a while. I'm going to think about that. Whenever starting something new, and it's like, oh, is this even worth it? I don't think that's the right question. Is this worth it? The better question is, what is God calling me to?
mhm.
And am I willing to plant in tears,
Mhm.
knowing that this is what God's wanting me to do? Even though it might be difficult and it might be hard, and I might be weeping as I plant the seed, but having faith that He will restore our fortunes,
Yeah.
which really has nothing to do about money, has everything to do with our renewal and our restoration in Him and our relationship with Him, and being faithful. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Beautiful.
great psalm. I mean, I used to, like I said, I thought of the beginning a lot. It was like a dream, filled with joy and laughter. But the last part of it never really stuck with me until now.
Yeah. And I think that's an important lesson for us to live of living in the psalm like that, is that
Yeah,
it actually can tell us a really important story. And when we apply it to our own hearts and our own lives, it can be
I,
instructive,
yeah.
but
I just thought of this.
transformation.
It's like the psalm is the seed that's being planted, and then it might lay dormant,
For
but
three
after a
whole
while,
weeks because we
yeah,
don't get
yeah,
to it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's like the psalmist knew that we were going to be waiting 3 weeks to be able to talk about it.
Really? That's true. Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kurt. I enjoyed this conversation
Dave.
immensely.
Every time. Every time. And
Every
so
single time.
yeah. And so if you want to be a part of this conversation, we really would encourage you to be able to watch the YouTube, to have a conversation with us in the chat area.
Yeah.
Click on the like button down in that corner down there,
Yes. And
and
subscribe.
follow it and
Subscribe.
subscribe.
Yeah.
And then like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. We now have a podcast, so you can listen to that wherever your podcasts are found. It's on all of the platforms, and so feel free to download that. And what we do is at the end of the week, this gets on uploaded, and then you can watch this, and then it's just a little discussion about maybe this passage or about what God's doing in our lives, and we want you to be a part of that as well. So the Pondering Passages network has really expanded dramatically. There's now blogs being posted. I still think we need to have t-shirts made, but
I know. I was thinking about that. Or bumper stickers. I forget. We came up with a couple of
I
good
like
ones.
that.
I forget what it was.
I like that. All right. Well, have a wonderful weekend. Have a great week, and may God bless you, and may God bring in the harvest in your life with joy. Welcome to Pondering Passages. I'm Curt Austin. My friend Dave Mullen is going. Let's try that again, since I stumbled all over your name.
Yeah, there's an S at the end.
I said Mullenses.
You said Mullen.